hidden beneath Rome's oldest temple, was something no history book dared explain. Welcome to Echo Slumber. I am your host, Arlen Graves. Tell me where in the world you're listening from. I love seeing how far this story travels. You make every episode a shared exploration. Now, the story. Beneath the bustling heart of Rome, past the echo of sandals on marble and the hum of modern streets, lies a silence older than her empire. It is a place where stone still remembers, and where hands long gone once carved secrets not meant for daylight. In the shadows beneath the Temple of Jupiter, Optimus Maximus, archaeologists found strange symbols etched deep into forgotten walls. Not Latin, not Greek, something else, something older. Who carved them and why remains one of the city's softest whispers. Tonight, we follow that whisper through time, through dust, through meaning buried far below empire. We truly love and care for you. You are safe here. You are welcome here. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it there? Now, grab your coffee and let's get started. They built high in Rome for a reason. The gods, after all, were meant to see far. To look out over the tiled rooftops, the winding streets, the lives being lived below, like candlelight flickering across stone. The Capitoline Hill, one of the city's famed seven, rose like a shoulder above the spine of the Roman world. And there at its peak, they crowned it not with a palace but with a promise, a temple to hold heaven close. The Temple of Jupiter. Optimus Maximus was not subtle. Columns thick as tree trunks, steps so wide a legion could kneel side by side. Its roof gleamed with gold, its walls pulsed with offerings. Jupiter, king of sky and thunder, shared his dominion with Juno, his queen, and Minerva, goddess of wisdom. Together the trio watched as Rome grew beneath them, from muddy settlement to empire. But tonight, we do not follow the light above. We follow what the light tried to forget. Because beneath the steps, beneath the altar, beneath even the foundation stones of that grand temple, there is a layer untouched by worshippers or priests. A layer not marked on any pilgrim's path. It is not Roman. It is not even Etruscan. It is older. And it is carved, not in the way of decoration. These markings were not meant for eyes admiring from afar. They weren't framed in mosaics or polished for grandeur. They were chiseled into raw earth, tight spaces, walls built to be hidden, symbols repeat, spirals unwind in silence. One after another, they form a language with no known voice. This is where we begin. You see, the Capitoline was once not a place of temples, but of trees. Before bricks and scrolls and senators, the hill held groves, animals, wind, and something else, something that made early settlers pause. For what Rome would later crown as divine might have been sacred long before the word divine was even spoken. Early account, those not erased, suggest a kind of reverence for the hill that predates the gods we know. Bones were found in strange circles, charcoal drawings buried beneath meters of construction fill, tools not Roman in shape, figurines of creatures not found in the Roman bestiary. Something watched here, long before marble eyes were set into statues, and when Rome laid its claim, with temples, processions, triumphs, it did not wipe the slate clean. It built over, as it often did. In ancient city planning, there is a quiet truth. The more sacred the site, the more likely it's built upon layers, not just of earth, but of memory. The Romans were master builders, yes, but also master buriers. And beneath the Temple of Jupiter, Optimus Maximus lies a burial not of bodies, but of something harder to define. A presence, a memory, a hush. In 1937, as workers prepared the foundations for a new museum extension on the hill's northern slope, a hollow sound beneath a struck stone led to the uncovering of a subchamber. Initial reports described it simply. A room beneath, then a passage, then much later, a shrine of unknown origin. The entrance was sealed not with doors but with stones packed tight, smeared with ash and lined with primitive mortar, a kind the Romans never used. It wasn't to keep people out, it was to keep something in. And inside, the carvings waited. You can almost picture the scene. A flicker of a torch, dust heavy in the air, making breath thick. A scholar bends close to the wall, traces a finger across a spiral that widens into an eye-like shape. He squints. He doesn't understand it. Not yet, because what he sees isn't meant for logic. It's older than grammar, older than empire. It's not meant to be solved, only remembered. And that is what we do here. In the soft light of night, we do not rush. We follow gently, like footsteps in dust. So let us linger for a moment more atop the Capitoline, where the temple stood, where festivals rang, where oracles once hummed. And now, where only pigeons keep watch and tourists pass by, unaware of what waits beneath their feet. Because while marble crumbles and empire fades, carvings in the quiet do not forget. They wait, and they welcome us when we are ready. Are you ready? Then take a breath. Let your shoulders soften. We begin, not at the surface but far beneath it, where someone long before Rome knelt in darkness and made their mark. Let us follow them now, gently, quietly, into the earth, into the silence, into the beginning. Before empire's shadow, before Latin, before law. Rome was not yet Rome. The 7 hills that would one day carry emperors were then wild ridges of wind and root. The Tiber was not a ribbon through marble, but a restless current, swollen in spring, cracked dry by late summer. There were no aqueducts, no milestones, no roads paved straight enough to tame distance. Just trees and firelight and stories whispered tonight. The Capitoline even then stood apart, a rise shaped not by human ambition, but by something slower, the way hills are shaped when earth remembers. It was not the highest of the 7, but it was the one the wind curled around most often. Locals said birds never nested there long, that dogs barked at its silence, that some places weren't meant for home, but for reverence. There were people, of course, not citizens, not soldiers, but watchers, listeners. They didn't call themselves Romans, they had no need to. Theirs was a world of stars and soil, of gestures and glances. And when something changed, when a new shape appeared in the clouds, or a grove felt colder than it should, they paid attention. We do not know what name they gave themselves. We do not know what gods they feared, but we know this, they carved. Not in stone, not at first, in bark, in bone, in soft clay that cracked by morning, symbols, spirals, markings made with careful repetition, as if the act itself held power. A prayer not spoken but etched, and then slowly, deeper. They found stone beneath the topsoil, basalt, porous but strong, and they began to mark it too. We don't know if it was worship, warning, or simply memory made solid, but the marks remain, and time, for all its sweeping, hasn't swept them away. Picture the hill then. No columns, no statues, just fog, and footpaths trodden into dirt by bare heels. A circle of people kneeling in the dark, a fire smouldering low, and one among them steps forward. He kneels, or maybe she does, takes a shard of stone in one hand, and begins to carve. There is no audience, no applause, only breath, and dust, and meaning. Because even before Rome had its gods, this hill felt like a threshold, a place where something passed through. Not quite earth, not quite sky, and those early carvers, perhaps they were not trying to speak to the gods. Perhaps they were trying to speak about them, or remind others of what had once passed here. We forget how old hills can be, not in years but in awareness, not in measurements but in memory. And when we say Rome, we often mean what came after, the marble, the empire, the pageantry. But before all of it, before even huts were drawn in chalk on shepherds' skins, there was presence, the kind that doesn't need statues to be known. And tonight we dwell there, in that time when Rome was just a hush, a possibility, when the only things rising from the ground were stories, and smoke, and the ground below the Capitoline was not yet sacred. But someone, a lone hand, a quiet soul, made it so, not by declaring it holy, but by touching stone and asking it to remember. That carving may not have had a name, but it had weight, the kind that survives centuries, the kind you can still feel if you press your palm against that wall today. It is not loud, it is not proud, it is simply true. So tonight we return to it, not as tourists, not as scholars, but as listeners. Let your mind drift now. Let the marble fade, let the empires fall away, and walk with us into the time before time kept records, where the first markings were not for empire, but for awe. Breathe slowly. The next carving waits. Rome has always lived in layers. Every new ruler built atop the old, not to erase it, but to contain it, as if the past was too sacred to destroy, or too dangerous to leave exposed. In the 1930s, the city was undergoing another transformation. Mussolini, in his vision of empire reborn, was carving broad boulevards through medieval neighbourhoods. Columns were re-erected, forums dug up, statues unveiled. Rome's skin was being scrubbed and reshaped, made to gleam again with imperial pride. But in the shadow of the Capitoline, as workers cleared debris near the ancient temple of Jupiter, something deeper stirred. A pick struck stone. Then silence, not the expected ring of solid foundation, but a soft hollow sound. The foreman ordered the work stopped. Torches were brought in. A few bricks, old and soot-stained, were pried loose. Behind them, blackness, a void where none should be, an entrance. They thought at first it might be a drainage chamber, or some forgotten Etruscan tunnel. Rome is full of such ghosts, old paths that lead nowhere. But this was different. The air that poured from the opening was thick, cold, and carried the faint scent of scorched earth and wet stone. Not musty, but burnt. And when they stepped inside, the light faltered, not because of dust, but because the chamber swallowed it. The space was small, no more than 12 feet across. Walls of rough-cut basalt curved slightly inward, like the inside of a cracked egg. No decorative flourishes, no inscriptions in Latin, no signs of Roman occupation. But there were markings. They started low along the base of the chamber, then spiraled upward in long, patient lines, cut deep into the stone, as if whoever carved them needed the marks to last. These weren't chisel strokes for art. They were incisions with purpose, repeated shapes, coiling loops, angular figures that reminded some of early Sumerian glyphs, others of Bronze Age notations, but matched neither. And most unsettling of all, the walls were scorched, not fire-damaged in a chaotic sense, but blackened in controlled arcs, patterns of flame, as if something had been lit within the chamber with deliberate, even ritualistic care. It didn't feel abandoned, it felt sealed, as if someone long ago had not left it behind, but locked it away. Officials were alerted, archaeologists were summoned quietly, without fanfare. The discovery was not made public. Mussolini's regime preferred stories that bolstered myth, not mystery. This chamber, unsanctioned by history, unclaimed by Roman grandeur, had no place in the narrative being built above it. So it was studied in silence. Photographs were taken, sketches drawn, but few were released. The chamber became a footnote in private excavation reports, labelled only as sub-Capitoline anomaly. But the few who entered it, the ones who stood there, shoulder to shadowed wall, reported something stranger than they expected. A feeling, not fear exactly, but containment. As if the room itself pressed back. One archaeologist, Dr. Eleanor Vantini, wrote in a private letter, "It felt like the room had been waiting for someone, but not us." She never published on it again. Others dismissed it as nonsense. Just another mystery Rome would bury again. And yet, the marks on the walls lingered in their minds. Not random, not decorative, but insistent. One shape in particular, repeated near the back of the chamber. A three-pointed curve, like a triskelion missing a limb, always carved over a patch of deeper black, where the stone felt somehow warmer. Theories multiplied in whispers. A pagan shrine that predated the Etruscans, a secret rite of early Rome expunged from the records, a pre-Roman culture that left no other trace except this room. But the strangest idea came not from scholars, but from a custodian. He was cleaning the torch brackets one night, alone, when he noticed the faint outline of a handprint near the entrance wall. Barely visible, but clear in angled light. Not painted, not carved, more like a scorch mark, as if a hand had been placed there during a fire. And the fingers were longer than any he'd seen. He mentioned it once, laughed it off, but no one ever found the mark again. Later scans of the chamber showed no handprint, but they did show something else. Behind the back wall, a small void. A second chamber. No entrance, no opening. Just an air pocket within the stone, roughly the size of a crouching adult. No tools were used to break through. The risk of damaging the first chamber was too high. The void remains sealed to this day, but its presence hums. Even in modern surveys, the chamber beneath the Temple of Jupiter resists clarity. Equipment malfunctions, recordings distort, not every time, just often enough to notice, as if the room remembers what it was made to hold, or who it was meant to keep out. So when you walk the Capitoline now, past the museums, the pigeons, the steps smoothed by time, know that beneath your feet is a chamber without name, without inscription, without God, and within it, carvings that no one claims, and a silence that has never stopped listening. Tonight we walk not just through history, but through what history was asked to forget. Take a breath, because next we will look at the symbols themselves, not to solve them, but to let them speak in their own quiet way. They were not meant to impress, they were not meant to be beautiful, and perhaps they were never meant to be seen at all. The carvings inside the chamber were not like the inscriptions Rome left elsewhere. No names of emperors, no tributes to battles won, no dedications to gods in gilded letters. These marks didn't announce, they invoked. At first glance they seemed simple. Lines, curves, angular loops pressed deep into stone. But the longer you looked, the more they resisted simplification. There was intention in every groove, weight in every repetition, and silence in every space left uncarved. They began low, near the floor, where torchlight barely reached. Small spirals, each just a few inches across, clustered in patterns that did not resolve into language. But they did move, slowly, methodically, climbing the walls in spirals, like a kind of geometric vine. Some widened and split, forming triangular knots. Others coiled tightly inward, as if trying to disappear into themselves. They were not Roman, they were not Greek, they were not Etruscan, Sabine, or even Paleolithic in character. They were else. A team of symbologists brought in during the 1940s tried to trace connections. Some compared them to Bronze Age Anatolian pictographs. Others suggested links to early Iberian markings, or even pre-Indus Valley notations. But each comparison dissolved under scrutiny. These symbols had no known ancestor, no precedents, no lineage to place them in. They did not belong, and yet they fit. That paradox lingered. One archaeologist described the chamber's carvings as language trying to remember itself. Another said they felt more like music, composed in stone, measured by rhythm rather than grammar. And then came the most curious observation: the spacing. Unlike typical inscriptions, these carvings weren't aligned horizontally or vertically. They didn't flow in rows or columns, but they moved, in spirals, yes, but also in pulses. Clusters formed and then vanished into emptiness, almost as if the chamber was not meant to be read, but felt, like the way your breath sinks to certain rhythms, like the way some lullabies linger even when the lyrics fade. There were repeated shapes, a hook with two tails, a triangle pierced through its heart, a series of loops nested into each other, like a snake folding upon itself. Some of the deepest grooves showed signs of recarving, as if someone centuries later had traced them again. But the hand was different, less certain, more afraid, as if they weren't just preserving the symbols, they were binding them. One symbol appeared more than any other, a three-pronged arc, always carved just above eye level. Never alone, always paired with a smaller mark beside it, a downward slash through a dot. No culture had recorded it, no language claimed it, and yet it showed up again in a remote tomb in Sardinia. Then again, in a cave wall in eastern Turkey. Then once more, carved faintly on a bone unearthed in a glacier, thousands of miles apart, thousands of years apart. The same mark, coincidence perhaps, or not. One theory suggested the carvings were not language at all, but direction, that each groove, each spiral, each angle was a form of mapping, not across space but consciousness, an attempt to record the internal, the dream, the passage between the seen and the unseen. Because when you stood in that chamber, truly still, a strange thing happened. You began to feel pulled, not toward the centre, but toward the walls, toward the marks, as if something inside them was reaching back. A low thrum in the stone, not sound, not vibration, just a presence. The symbols didn't explain themselves. They didn't offer meaning. They waited. And in that waiting, they spoke, not in sentences, but in silence. Have you ever stared at something, a painting, a horizon, a flame, and felt it see you back? That's what these carvings did. They didn't ask for translation. They asked for recognition. Tonight, as you rest, imagine your hand brushing the surface of one. Cold at first, then warming beneath your fingers, the groove deeper than expected, the curve more deliberate. It doesn't tell you what it is. It doesn't need to. It only asks that you notice, that you remember something your ancestors may have forgotten, that once beneath the city of emperors someone carved a message, not for power, but for presence, and perhaps for you. Stone remembers heat, not like paper, which crumbles, not like wood, which disappears, but like skin, scorched and sealed. When the chamber beneath the Capitoline Hill was first opened, it was the burnt smell that unsettled them. Faint, but clinging. Not the sharp smoke of a recent blaze, but the buried trace of something much older, a ritual that left its breath behind. On closer study, the carvings weren't merely chiseled, they had been seared. Char marks curled along the edges of the symbols, sometimes tracing the lines with eerie precision. In places, the grooves darkened to deep black. In others, they shimmered faintly, as if heat had drawn something out from within the stone itself. It wasn't the pattern of accidental fire. It was careful, controlled, repeated, as though fire had not been used after the carving, but during. Some researchers proposed that the marks mimicked the movement of flame, spiraling upward, flaring outward, twisting in ways that resembled smoke's curl. Others believed the fire was the tool, not chisels, but flame itself, drawn through oil, metal, or sacred resin, used to etch into the stone, like a brand into memory. Ritual was the only word they could use. But ritual for what? Not for burial. No bones were placed neatly. Not for worship. No idols stood. Not for warning. There were no inscriptions, no barriers, just stone, fire, and the markings in between. In the quiet of the archive rooms, scholars whispered theories like prayers. What if the fire wasn't a tool, but an offering? What if someone or something needed heat, not to destroy, but to remember? A few even asked the question more directly. What if the chamber wasn't meant for people? What if it was built for something else, to inhabit? There was a pattern to the burn. When the chamber was scanned in infrared, the heat signature left behind showed a spiral, distinct and deliberate. It wasn't centered. It started near the far wall and curved inward like a shell, or like something being lured toward the core. And at the heart of that spiral, nothing. No object, no altar, no remains. Just a patch of stone that read slightly warmer than the rest. Even today, one archaeologist, speaking off-record, called it the Ember, a place where heat was once held and still lingered. She claimed that when she placed her hand over it, she felt a pulse. Not warmth, but a kind of breath. Theories grew more speculative with each passing year. Some suggested the chamber had been used for initiations, a place where one entered the dark, met flame, and left marked. Others thought it was a site of punishment. The fire not as symbol, poc always, but sentence. But the most haunting theory came from a linguist named Mauro Salvi. He studied flame patterns, not language, not history, but how fire moved. And when he was shown the carvings, he said this: "These aren't just symbols, they're instructions, not for words, but for motion." He believed the carvings detailed a ritual of ignition, the shape of the fire, the way it should curl, rise, collapse, and rise again. Not a depiction of fire, but a choreography, as if to create flame properly was to open something, a doorway, a memory, a voice. He was laughed out of most conferences, but he never stopped drawing those shapes, and he never returned to the chamber. Some truths are too large for the room that first holds them. Tonight, we sit with that idea, not to chase answers, but to feel the warmth of the question. What was fire to those who came before words? Not destruction, not fear, perhaps translation. Perhaps they could not speak what they needed to say, so they burned it into stone. Let the flame carry it. Let the stone hold it. Let time forget the reason, but not the ritual. And now, as you rest, imagine your breath curling like smoke. Imagine your thoughts moving like flame, slowly, upward, curling around old symbols. Not to read them, just to feel their heat. Because sometimes, to listen, we must first grow quiet enough to warm. And before Rome carved its laws into stone, before the legions marched and the Senate decreed, there were the Etruscans, mysterious, skilled, shadowed by time. They did not leave behind grand epics or marble triumphs, but they knew the sky like a book, they knew metal like a language, and they knew how to speak to the dead. From the 9th century BCE, long before the city of Rome took shape, the Etruscans were already building, not just towns, but tombs. Not just altars, but instruments of divination. Their cities, like Veii and Tarquinia, flourished across central Italy. They traded. With Greece mastered bronze and buried their dead in chambers that mimicked the living world, bedrooms, banqueting halls, corridors made for the afterlife. But for all their refinement, there was a constant thread in their world: omen. The Etruscans read the future in lightning. They consulted the liver of sacrificed animals. They carried curved staffs, lituous, to trace celestial paths. To them, the divine was not distant. It was immediate, demanding, hungry. And the gods were not kind, not cruel either, but transactional. You gave them order, devotion, signs. They gave you, maybe, protection. So when early scholars first examined the carvings beneath the temple of Jupiter, the Etruscans were the obvious suspects. The time fit, the mystery fit, and the gravity of the marks, deep, ritualistic, mirrored Etruscan sensibilities. Some of the symbols, especially the spirals and Triskelion forms, bore vague resemblance to etchings found in Etruscan necropolises. Not exact matches, but echoes. And then there was the fire. Etruscans did not fear flame. They used it in ritual, in metallurgy, in purification. Some tombs even contained soot-stained walls, where small fires were lit to bless the space. Could this chamber, then, have been one of theirs? A forgotten shrine to an unknown god? A ritual space sealed for sacred silence? It's tempting to believe. It would make the story neater, but the Etruscans were careful record keepers, in their own way. They left symbols we've partially deciphered, language on pottery, on tomb walls, on ivory and bronze. And nowhere do their known markings match what was found beneath the Capitoline. Even their most cryptic glyphs lack the weight of those carvings, the depth, the resistance to naming. And then there's the oldest question of all. Did the Etruscans build the chamber, or did they find it? Some early Roman texts, fragmentary and often dismissed, suggest that the Etruscans were not the first to worship on the hill, that even they had found something waiting there, a place already sacred, already watching. One line scratched in the margin of a lost Roman priest's scroll reads, "They built over the cave, not to enter, but to hold it down." Whoever they were is never clarified. But some archaeologists believe this line refers to a moment when the Etruscans chose to contain rather than expand, a moment of reverence or fear, and it would not be the first time. Across Etruscan territories, we find burial mounds that are not tombs, caves sealed not for the dead, but for something else, sealed before use, not after, as if some places were touched by memory too heavy to carry forward. And what of the chamber's fire? Etruscan flame rites followed patterns, circles, altars, burnt offerings, but the burns beneath the Capitoline do not follow those rules. They spiral inward, not outward like a call, but inward like a seal, which leads us to a troubling possibility. The Etruscans may have built around the chamber, not to worship in it, but to keep others from entering. There are no steps leading down, no symbols welcoming the gods, just stone, blackened, silent, waiting. And isn't that what ancient fear does? It doesn't always speak aloud. Sometimes it builds over and hopes the earth forgets. Tonight, as we drift through time, we don't ask the Etruscans to explain. We simply listen to their metal, to their tombs, to their silence, because perhaps they too stood before that chamber and chose not to open it. Perhaps they felt something in the walls, in the symbols, in the warmth that never faded, and perhaps they whispered, "Not now, not yet." Rome had no patience for hesitation. It absorbed, renamed and rebuilt. Shrines became forums, tombs became foundations, gods were merged and silenced. But not this, not the lapis niger. Near the Roman Forum, not far from the Capitoline Hill, lies a patch of black stone, easily missed by tourists, softly fenced, slightly sunken, quiet. It does not call attention to itself, but for those who know, it hums. The lapis niger, Latin for black stone, is one of the oldest monuments in Rome. Not grand, not tall, just a slab. Dark, smooth, marked. It was unearthed in 1899, beneath layers of marble and rubble, resting like a held breath. What made it strange wasn't its colour, it was its words. A short inscription in early Latin, nearly illegible now, was found nearby. And its meaning, once translated, was clear in tone, if not in detail. Do not disturb, sacred, dangerous. The warning wasn't poetic, it was direct, urgent, as if the stone wasn't protecting something beneath it, but sealing it. What lay under it? A fragment of a column, ash, shattered remnants of something not fully understood. Some believed it marked the tomb of Romulus, Rome's mythic founder. Others said it concealed the remains of an even older altar. A handful suggested it wasn't a tomb or shrine at all, but a site where something was silenced. What remains undeniable is what Rome didn't do. It didn't remove it. Even in its most prideful centuries, when emperors renamed months and spread marble across continents, the lapis niger was left in place. Surrounded, respected, untouched, it was unlike Rome to retreat from myth. But here, it did. Scholars have speculated that the stone marked a memory too ancient for comfort, a place where law gave way to dread, where the earth, once disturbed, could not be reasoned with. It is not the only black stone in Rome, but it is the only one subtiene wrapped in warning. And now we turn our gaze beneath it. What is it about dark stone, that captures both reverence and fear. Black in Roman ritual was the colour of the underworld, of crows, of shadows, of blood that had turned. Offerings to chthonic deities, the gods below, were made at night, in silence, often in secret. The lapis niger fits that rhythm, not a celebration, a containment, and it shares something else with the chamber beneath the Capitoline Hill: restraint. In both places, Rome, a civilization defined by conquest, held back. They did not drill, did not shatter, did not excavate further. They built around, as if even empire had its boundaries, as if even Rome, in all its certainty, heard something ancient and chose not to answer. Tonight we sit beside that stone. Imagine your fingers brushing across its surface, warm from the sun, cool beneath, smooth but with hidden edges, a stone that has watched the city rise and fall and never moved. They say stones do not speak, but this one warned. And when the Romans read its message, they listened, not with obedience, but with instinct. Because beneath their myths, beneath their victories and vision, Rome remembered what it once was: a city built not just on soil, but on silence. And in that silence, some things remained sacred, not because they were holy, but because they were untouched. Let your breath slow now. Let your thoughts rest on dark stone. It does not need translation. It does not beg understanding. It only asks, do you feel it? Do you feel what they feared and chose to leave alone? The chamber was never meant to be seen. That much we know. But sometimes what was never meant to be found leads further still. In 1941, during a resurvey of the chamber beneath the Temple of Jupiter, a graduate assistant noticed something odd in the eastern wall, a faint gap between two stones, just wide enough to let dust shift through. When they tapped it, it echoed differently. Not the dull, full-bodied thud of solid rock, but a sound with depth. What they uncovered next was not dramatic. There was no hidden door, no collapsing panel, no ceremonial threshold, just a narrow slit, no more than 2 feet wide, descending at a shallow angle. The stone around it was older than the chamber, rougher, more eroded, lined with soft deposits of minerals left by centuries of unseen condensation. It was a passage, a tunnel, and it was not on any map. No Roman engineering plans mentioned it. No temple records, no architectural fragments, no religious texts. It was as if the tunnel had never existed. And yet, there it was. It angled downward, not steeply, just enough to feel unnatural, as if it were leaning away from something above, as if it wanted to escape. The air inside was stale but not dead. It had moved recently. Those who entered first reported a strange sensation, a feeling not of being watched, but of following something that had already left. The tunnel was long, roughly 12 meters, though it curved enough to prevent a straight line of sight, and along its inner wall, on the left side only, a single mark repeated. Again and again, sometimes carved deep, sometimes barely scratched. It wasn't a word in any known language. It wasn't even a symbol with obvious meaning. Just 3 vertical lines, joined at the base by a small crescent, like a trident without a handle, or a flame turned inward. It appeared 32 times along the tunnel, always facing the same direction, always at shoulder height. No one knows what it meant, but no one doubts that it meant something. The repetition was obsessive, not ornamental, not decorative. It was insistence. One archaeologist, sketching the symbols late at night, remarked, "It doesn't feel like someone wrote it here. It feels like they were leaving it behind, over and over, like a breadcrumb trail, from somewhere they didn't want to forget." But who and why? Some believed it was a guide, a directional mark, perhaps leading back to something long hidden. Others said it was a boundary, a repeated spell, meant to keep something out. But the most whispered theory came from one of the Vatican scholars allowed private access in the 1960s. He said only once in a closed conversation, The word is not for us, it's for what's still beneath, because at the end of the tunnel the passage narrowed, then stopped, not with a wall, but with a collapse. Stone long fallen in, too old to date, too heavy to move. What lay beyond was sealed, no one excavated further. The risk to the structure above, and perhaps something deeper, was too great. But when ground-penetrating radar was used decades later, it revealed something strange behind that fall. Not a chamber, not a cavity, a corridor, a continuation, and it turned, sharply, away from the direction of the temple, away from the Capitoline Hill itself. No one has followed it, no one can, and still, those marks wait in the tunnel. 3 lines, 1 crescent, 32 times. They have no known translation, but they are not forgotten. Because sometimes memory lives not in meaning, but in pattern, in rhythm, in echo, like the way wind finds the same crack in a window, like the way a name you don't remember still feels familiar on your tongue. The tunnel exists. It was never meant to. It leads to a wall, and beyond that, only silence. But in that silence, something lingers. A direction, a breath, a repeated whisper. Here, 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 tonight, close your eyes and imagine that corridor. Stone brushing your shoulders, marks beneath your fingertips. A path not built to be walked, but remembered. You do not need to reach the end. You only need to know it's there, waiting. Rome loved names. They etched them onto marble, bronze, clay. Every arch was an announcement. Every temple, a signature, built by Marcus, funded by Lucius, dedicated to Jupiter, Mars, Minerva. Even aqueducts bore inscriptions. Even sewers had plaques. In Rome, to build was to be remembered. To shape the city was to write your name into eternity. But beneath the temple of Jupiter, where the air thickens and the stone holds its breath, there is nothing. No inscription, no name, no invocation, just the chamber, the carvings, and silence. It is the most un-Roman thing imaginable. No glory, no honour, no legacy, and yet someone made it. Someone carved the spirals, laid the stones, measured the lines, lit the fire. So who was it? Not a team of builders, not the state. There are no signs of construction orders, no architectural blueprints, no records in any surviving Roman ledger. The materials used were inconsistent. Some stone was local, some imported. Some walls were smooth, others were jagged like they'd been patched hastily, or deliberately left rough. It wasn't designed for comfort or for function, it was designed to hold. But hold what? And on whose behalf? When scholars examined the joinery and the stonework, they noticed something else. The cuts were irregular, not in quality, but in rhythm, as if the builder wasn't working from a plan, but from memory, or perhaps from urgency. The room's dimensions are uneven, its curvature imperfect, yet the carvings are precise. The contradiction is unsettling. The space was shaped with haste, but carved with patience. One archaeologist wrote in her journal, "It's as if the architect was racing time, but not their own." And then there is the absence of the divine. No gods, no dedications, no symbols of any known faith. The Romans invoked gods compulsively. Even private homes had shrines. Even toilets were blessed. But here, nothing. It's not that gods were forgotten. It's that they were excluded. This chamber was not made to worship. It was made to confess, or to warn, or to apologize. That theory, the apology, came from a student who visited once and never returned. She stood in the center of the chamber for an hour, didn't take notes, didn't speak. When asked how it felt, she said quietly, "Like someone did something here, and couldn't undo it." That stayed with the team. It unsettled them. Because once you think of the room as an apology, you start seeing everything differently. The uneven stones, the downward tunnel, the scorched symbols, the absence of a name, as if the person who built it didn't want to be remembered, as if their name was a burden, as if legacy would only spread the damage. We often assume those who came before us wanted to be known, but what if this one didn't? What if their greatest act of care was their disappearance? What if the chamber wasn't a monument, but a secret, a wound stitched shut with stone? And what if that wound still pulses beneath the hill, not to reopen, but to remind? Not everything in history was meant to be celebrated. Some things were meant to be contained. And tonight, as we sit with this thought, we do not judge the silence, we honor it. Let your breath fall into rhythm with the chamber. Let its uneven stones guide your thoughts. There was an architect. We do not know their name, we do not know their crime, but we know this. They left behind a shape, a warning, and maybe a forgiveness, not for themselves, but for us. At first it looked like ordinary soot, the kind that settles after centuries of forgotten torches. A thin layer of black across the chamber floor, nestling into cracks, clinging to the edges of stone. But Rome is a city of layers, and soot is never just soot. When the first samples were collected and tested, the results surprised even the skeptics. This wasn't simple carbon. It wasn't the residue of lamps or smoke from cooking fires. It was something else entirely. Tiny shards of volcanic glass, slivers of obsidian so fine they resembled sand, crushed bone ash, irregular in texture, not ground with ceremony, but shattered, pulverized. The glass had a trace signature. It didn't come from the local hills, not from the Alban volcanoes, not from Mount Vesuvius. It came from the far south, the Aeolian Islands, perhaps even beyond, which raised a question. Why was it here? Why transport volcanic glass across hundreds of miles, only to grind it into dust and scatter it across a chamber that no one was meant to enter? There were no vessels to hold it, no urns, no ritual bowls, no deliberate arrangements. It was spread, unevenly, almost desperately, as if someone had tried to scrub the floor with it, or bury something invisible, or make a mark that time could never fully remove. And the bone ash, it was human, but incomplete, fragments of fragments, too broken to reconstruct, too partial to identify. Not cremated in the traditional sense, not Roman, not Etruscan, not honoured. If anything, they seemed discarded, as if whatever ceremony had taken place here had gone wrong, or never meant to be a ceremony at all. Some researchers proposed that the dust was meant to erase, not to remember, but to overwrite, to layer the ground with material so ancient, so foreign, that it would bury whatever had once happened there. Not physically, but energetically, symbolically, because the chamber was not empty. Even when cleared, it felt full. That fullness had no shape, no voice, only pressure. Those who stood in the centre too long sometimes reported headaches, vertigo, a tightness in the chest. One technician fainted without warning. All of them described the same thing. A smell. Not smoke, not rot. Something between iron and stone. Old and sharp. The kind of scent you don't notice with your nose, but feel behind your eyes. The black dust lingered even after cleaning. It resettled, returned to the corners, hung in the air like a patient breath. And when they stopped trying to remove it, it seemed to settle deeper, like it had won. That too raised questions. What if the dust wasn't a remnant of ritual? What if it was the ritual, not to invoke, but to erase? What if someone long ago had walked into that chamber with a handful of ash and glass, not to praise a god or bury the dead, but to scrub out a memory that refused to die? You see, there are rituals not of summoning, but of sealing. There are prayers not to the heavens, but to silence. And sometimes silence is made with fire, and ash, and glass that cuts too small to see. There's one final detail, a layer beneath the dust, only found in a single corner, pressed so thin it was missed for years. A trace of pigment, red, iron-rich, smeared, not painted, not art, not message, just motion. A wide, desperate sweep, like a hand brushing across the floor, dragging blood or pigment or both. It didn't form a shape, but it echoed one, a spiral, like the carvings, like the fire, all of it pointing inward, always inward, as if the chamber was not a room, but a wound, and the dust, not evidence, but scar tissue. Tonight, let us sit on that floor in our minds. Let us kneel gently into the ash, the glass, the forgotten trace of someone's attempt to make something disappear. Feel the cold beneath you, the quiet rising around you. And know, even what is meant to be erased sometimes chooses to remain. Not to haunt, not to accuse, but to remind. That forgetting takes work, and that some places, no matter how deep, remember everything. Stone should not hold warmth for long, especially not down here, beneath layers of history, sealed from the sun, closed off from breath and body and flame. In the chamber beneath the temple of Jupiter, the air is still, cool, dry, undisturbed. And yet, one stone defied that stillness. It was a slab along the lower eastern wall, unremarkable in appearance, rough-edged, like the others, covered in the same black dust, bordered by the same symbols. But when scanned with thermal imaging, it showed something different, a glow, faint, software. Just a few degrees, 3 to be exact, warmer than the surrounding stone. That should have been impossible. There were no heating elements, no electric currents, no air pockets beneath it, and yet the warmth remained, even after days, even after weeks. One technician checked the device, then another. Then they brought new equipment. Same reading, same glow, same soft edge of warmth, like something exhaling just beneath the surface. They touched it, expecting the usual chill of ancient stone. But it felt different, not hot, but alive, as though it had once held fire and never quite let it go. No inscriptions marked it, but the spirals, those quiet, coiling symbols, bent slightly toward this slab, almost imperceptibly. A gravitational lean, a curling of pattern toward a single point. It became known among the team as the Heartstone, not for its shape, but for its pulse. Some said they could feel it in their fingertips, others denied it entirely. But no one could explain it. Tests were inconclusive. The stone's composition was normal, basalt and tough like the others. Its thickness matched the wall. It was not hollow, and yet it held a steady warmth. And the warmth wasn't radiating, it was contained, like a coal buried deep, long after the fire had died. One researcher offered a simple theory. Maybe sunlight from centuries ago had slowly absorbed into the stone, a kind of deep-time thermal echo, but that didn't explain why the surrounding stone stayed cold, or why the warmth didn't dissipate. It just stayed. Another theory came from an old priest who visited quietly, unofficially. He said very little, but before he left he placed his palm gently on the Heartstone and whispered, "Some warmth is permission." He wouldn't say more. And then there was the dream. Not a story, not a record, just a note. Left behind in the journal of a junior archaeologist who had spent 3 nights working late in the chamber. She wrote, "I fell asleep for a moment near the wall. I dreamed of something breathing, not near me, inside the stone, not asking to come out, just remembering how." The page ends there. She never returned. Was it imagination? Suggestion? A mind wandering where it shouldn't? Or did something older stir in that space, not to reveal itself, but to remind us it was never fully gone? Heat is not always fire. Sometimes it is presence, sometimes it is memory, and sometimes it is warning. Not violent, not cruel, just steady. Tonight, as your breath slows, imagine placing your hand on that stone. Feel it, not hot, not cold, just aware. You don't need to understand it. You don't need to name it. You only need to feel what they once felt. Those who came before, those who built the chamber, those who carved toward that quiet pulse. Warmth in the deep. Not forgotten, not gone, still breathing, still here. Stone doesn't forget what it once held. Even after centuries, it carries the memory, in discoloration, in the echo of fastenings, in the scars left by removal. So when they found the alcove on the southern wall, they knew something had once been there. It wasn't carved, it wasn't painted. It had been attached. 4 rusted anchor points, evenly spaced, pressed into the stone with care. Each held the faintest trace of oxidized metal, a plate once affixed with intent. But it was gone, removed not in recent years, not by scholars, not by looters, but long before the chamber had ever been unearthed. Whoever took it did so before Rome became history. The outline remained, a faint rectangle, the stone beneath it slightly paler, untouched by time and soot. It was not large, about the size of a human hand or a book bound in bronze, but it had weight, not physical, symbolic. This wasn't decoration, it was message. The question was, what kind? Rome, like Greece and Egypt, adored inscriptions. They named, praised, warned. They declared ownership. They claimed space, but this plate was different. It had been hidden inside a sealed chamber, not for display, not for devotion, for something else. What kind of message is buried in silence? What kind of inscription is meant to be seen by no one, and then taken away? Some believe it was a warning, a final line etched in metal, urging anyone who entered to leave, a safeguard, a seal. But if so, why remove it? Who took the words? And more importantly, why were they afraid to leave them behind? Others think the plate was a record, not of names, but of blame, an acknowledgement of what had been done inside the chamber, a confession cast in metal, too dangerous to preserve. There's also this. Early records mention a single scrap of inscribed bronze found near the temple ruins in the 1870s, long before the chamber's discovery. It bore a fragment of early Latin, partially illegible. Most dismissed it as debris, but one word stood out: tacete, be silent. It wasn't in the style of a command, it was more like a plea. The scrap was lost in a fire during World War I, but its description survived. Some now wonder, could that fragment have once belonged to the missing plate? Could it have slipped from the alcove long before the chamber was sealed, or been torn from it, in haste or fear? It's speculation, but in this place, speculation is how memory survives. There's another theory, quiet, strange, persistent, that the plate wasn't taken by archaeologists or stolen in the dark, that it was removed by those who had placed it long ago, that whatever it said no longer applied, or worse, became too dangerous to say. What kind of sentence is too sharp to leave behind? What kind of knowledge needs to be unwritten? We may never know, but the outline remains, the shape in the stone, the 4 small rust circles, like the corners of a mouth that once tried to speak. Sometimes the absence of words is more powerful than the words themselves, and sometimes silence is the inscription. Tonight, sit with that silence. Let your thoughts rest in the alcove. Feel the space where something once rested, and chose somehow to leave. Not all truths are taken by time. Some are taken by choice, and that choice lingers in the emptiness, in the unanswered, in the space where language once was at, and now only stone remains. Rome was a collector of gods. As it expanded over mountains, rivers and seas, it gathered deities the way generals gathered spoils. From Egypt, they welcomed Isis. From Greece, Apollo and Dionysus. From Gaul and Britain, forest spirits and war gods, renamed and folded into Roman worship. They didn't fear foreign gods, they invited them, renamed them, gave them temples and festivals. But not all gods were given space. Some were met with hesitation, others with violence, and a few were never named again. There were gods Rome could not tame, not because they were too strange, but because they were too close, too familiar in their wildness, too hard to mould into marble. And some, it seems, Rome buried. There is a category of deity the scholars rarely speak of, not because we know too little, but because what we know does not behave. These were gods that did not fit the Roman system. They did not demand sacrifice, they demanded recognition. They were not appeased with ritual. They moved in dreams, in illness, in silence. They did not offer protection. They offered truth. And truth, to empire, is always inconvenient. A few of their names survive in scraps, whispered once in Senate records during times of panic, or scrawled onto lead curse tablets, buried in wells. Names like Velor, Assarin and Threno, never mentioned twice. No descriptions, no prayers, just traces. The chamber beneath the temple of Jupiter contains no altars, no idols, no known invocations. But the way the space resists interpretation, the way its symbols echo flame, spiral, silence, some believe it was not godless. It was a vessel, not for worship, but for presence. Some think the chamber was made not for prayer, but for containment, not a shrine, a cell. What if one of these gods, the unclaimed, the untamed, was placed here? Bound, sealed, not to be erased, but to be stilled. It would explain the silence, the fire, the markings that bend toward the center, as if spiraling around a weight no longer visible. It would explain the missing name, the stolen plate, the warmth in the stone, because a god that cannot be worshipped must be managed. And Rome knew this. There are stories, rarely translated, of priests who are not part of the public pantheon, assigned not to temple, but to sites, to places where something had to be watched. Not honoured, just watched. They were called custodes umbri, keepers of the shadow. Their duties were not recorded. Their prayers, if they spoke them, are lost. But one record, in the margins of a military scroll, notice: one custodian did not return from the hill. The stone will be resealed, no names. The hill was not named, but the timing and the language suggest the Capitoline. There's a reason Roman religion shifted so easily into ritual over belief. Because belief is dangerous. Belief invites change, but ritual can be repeated. Without understanding, without consequence, unless of course something remembers. And in the chamber beneath the old temple, something does. The warmth in the wall, the dust on the floor, the word in the tunnel, the silence where a name should be. Not absence, intention, and perhaps a presence that Rome could not remake. It is said that some gods are not born of people, that they rise from the land, or fall from dreams, or step out of time, and such beings even empire fears. Tonight, let your thoughts soften into that possibility, that beneath the might of Rome, beneath the city of law, brick and order, was a single room not built for power, but for pause. And in that pause, a breath was held, not of man, not of myth, but of something Rome met once and never dared name again. There is a moment every scholar faces, when understanding slips from the page and meaning becomes something you feel, not solve. The carvings in the chamber beneath the Temple of Jupiter have been studied for over 80 years. Linguists, archaeologists, code breakers, even poets, they've all tried to crack the spiral sequences, to assign value to the shapes, to match the marks to known alphabets, known tongues, known systems of thought. And always the same result. The symbols do not translate. They do not behave like language. They do not follow the rules of structure. No consistent grammar, no word boundaries, no pattern that sustains across the full wall. They start with repetition, then unravel, like a song that remembers its chorus but forgets the verses. At first, this baffled researchers. Then it irritated them. And then something quieter set in, a kind of reverence. Because slowly they began to suspect these were not letters, not code. They were moments, emotional signatures, pressed into stone, not designed to be read, but felt. One linguist described it best. It's not a message, it's a presence. The spirals didn't explain. They echoed. Like a lullaby sung in a language you don't know, but still remember. A pull behind the ribs, a hum you can't trace. Others noticed something else. When you followed the carvings with your hand, slowly, carefully, some of them aligned with natural breathing. One symbol would fit the inhale, another the pause, another the exhale. Not every mark, just enough. It led some to believe the symbols weren't written at all. They were breathed, dictated not in words but in rhythm. Perhaps once spoken aloud, not in sentences but etched, but in sound. A language of sleep, or prayer, or warning. Whispers not meant for the ear but for the nervous system. Like the way you shiver when someone says your name in a dream. There are precedents. Early proto-writing from the Neolithic often involved marks that seem symbolic, but defy language. Patterns carved into bone, cave, wood, repeated enough to show intention, but never decoded. They may not be meant to be. What if this chamber holds not a message to interpret, but a memory to inhabit? Something you don't solve, but sit with. Because not all knowledge is rational. Not all truth speaks aloud. Some truths arrive as atmosphere, as weight in a room, as a shape that stirs your chest even when your mind is silent. One researcher, a semiotician, once spent 12 hours in the chamber, sketching the markings from floor to ceiling. She came out pale, shaking, and when asked what she saw, she said, "They weren't written for us. They're what's left after language breaks." Later she wrote in a notebook, "If grief could write, it would look like this. If sleep had a script, if something tried to speak after too much silence." It changed the way the team approached the carvings. They stopped trying to translate and started to listen. They dimmed the lights, sat with the symbols for hours, let their breath slow, stopped speaking, and one by one they began to sense something different, not clarity, but coherence, a logic that wasn't linguistic, but emotional, a sadness, a warning, a kind of apology that made no sense, and all the sense in the world. Tonight, let your breath fall into that rhythm. Imagine tracing your hand along the wall, following the marks with no need to know their meaning. You don't need to translate a lullaby, you just let it hold you. You don't need to decode a warning whispered in wind. You just turn your head and listen. Some stories aren't told, they're remembered. Not by the mind, but by the body. And some chambers were never meant to speak, only to stay and wait, until someone quiet enough came to sit beside them. It was the kind of mark you only notice if you stop looking. Tucked low near the far wall, where the chamber curves inward, where the symbols grow sparse and the dust settles thicker, was a carving that did not match the others. 3 circles, interlocking, not graceful or ornamental, but gouged. The lines were deeper than any in the chamber, not etched with patience, but pressed with force. A hand that didn't trace, it insisted. They overlapped just slightly. A small triangle formed where all 3 met, and within that triangle, a faint depression, as if a stone once placed there had long since vanished. The team catalogued it quietly, unsure what to make of it. It didn't resemble Roman iconography. It wasn't Etruscan, Egyptian, or Greek. And then someone remembered something. A clay shard, filed away in a museum in Western Turkey, unearthed decades earlier at an excavation in Anatolia, from a site older than writing. On its surface, the same 3 circles. The lines were crude, cracked by time, but the match was near exact. The scale, the spacing, the intersection. The fragment had been dismissed as meaningless, a potter's practice, a child's game, until now. Because the carving in Rome was not practice, it was final. A seal, a signature, or something older. They called it the triptych mark. Theories followed quickly. Some claimed it represented the 3 primary forces: creation, destruction, and memory. Others saw it as a kind of lock, each circle a guardian of the space within. And there were whispers of more speculative ties. In early myth systems, long before pantheons, long before scripture, symbols of 3 recur. 3 voices, 3 nights, 3 gates, not as numbers, but as rhythm, as structure. One to call, one to hold, one to end. But what was the fourth? The center. Was it a god, a truth, a silence, or something else entirely? Something not meant to move, but to anchor. One linguist, tracing the grooves by hand, said it felt like the place language turns back from, like the threshold between thought and forgetting. The same symbol appeared, faintly, on an amulet found in Sardinia, and again on a scorched tablet in the Syrian desert. Always alone, never explained. It was not decorative, it was directive, and in the Roman chamber, its presence posed a haunting question. How did it get here? The cultures that carved it lived millennia apart. They spoke no common tongue, traded no goods, built no roads, and yet the same symbol appeared, as if something older than culture was carried, not through maps, but through memory, through dreams, through fire, through the hands of those who woke with a mark they could not forget. The carving in the chamber bore traces of heat. The stone surrounding it was darker, slightly fused, as if the circles had been scorched into the wall, not by torch, but by intention. Some marks are made with tools, others with necessity. What needed to be marked here? What needed to be bound? Was this a sign of closure or a key? Some believed the triangle formed at the centre was once filled, perhaps with a stone or a token or something meant to remain sealed inside. But it's gone. No remnants, no fragments, just the hollow and the shape that remembers it. Tonight, imagine standing before those three circles. Let your breath find their rhythm. Not linear, not loud, just layered. One circle calls, one circle watches, one circle ends. And in the quiet space between them, the part left untouched, you rest. Because not all carvings are symbols, some are instructions, not for what to do, but for how to be. Still, aware, unhurried, like a seal placed not to guard something terrible, but to honour something sacred. Not to keep it in, not to keep us out, but to remind us. We once knew how to listen, and somewhere beneath the stone, we still do. It was supposed to be practical. A narrow stone-cut trench running along the chamber's perimeter, a drainage channel, likely for runoff, condensation, perhaps the remains of ancient fire. At least that's what they assumed. The channel was shallow, unremarkable. It disappeared beneath a wall at one end, clogged with dust and time. But one day, during a gentle cleaning, a glint surfaced. Not metal, not pottery, bone, small, pale, human, a single piece. At first they thought it might be animal, rodent perhaps, caught in the cold centuries ago. But when cleaned, it told another story. It was a phalanx, a finger bone. Delicate, old, too old, carbon dating, cautious and partial, placed it centuries before Rome. Older than the earliest known settlement on the hill. Older even than the earliest Etruscan layer beneath the city. And yet it was here, nestled in the run of the chamber's carved gutter. It wasn't alone. Further brushing revealed a sliver of jaw, a tooth, a fragment of rib, all from the same body, all impossibly old, too small for an adult, but not a child, a youth, perhaps a young woman. The arrangement was strange, not a burial, no grave goods, no protection, scattered, not placed, as if washed, carried through water, drawn by gravity, settled in silence. The team hesitated. Was this a coincidence? Had later floodwaters brought these fragments in? Or had someone once placed them there, deliberately, as part of a rite, long unspoken? They tested the sediment around the bones. No signs of modern contamination, no evidence of disturbance. The bones had been there a long, long time, and the chamber had been built around them. That realization shifted everything, because Rome, for all its glory, was built upon older ground. But rarely do we find something so human, so intimate, beneath a space already soaked in mystery. Who was she? Theories unfurled slowly. Perhaps a sacrifice, an ancient offering, long before the chamber was carved, or a body hidden, discarded, made to vanish under stone and silence. But some researchers saw something gentler. Not a punishment, not a ritual, a reminder. As if her remains had been placed there not to please a god, but to anchor a memory. To make sure something was never forgotten. Bone lasts. It survives fire, flood, empire. It speaks when all else fades. And sometimes, the ground keeps stories not for history, but for conscience. There's one more detail. Her finger bone, the phalanx, was found directly beneath the 3 interlocking circles. The same seal carved deep into the wall. It could be coincidence, but in a place where everything feels placed by intent, coincidence begins to tremble. One symbologist wrote in her notes, the circles were the seal, the bones were the price. Others say, no, she was not the price, she was the witness, the one who knew what had happened here, the one who stayed, not haunting, not warning, just remaining. Because even in forgetting, some truths leave a trace, and sometimes the ground remembers more than we ask. Tonight, let us sit with that memory. Not to name it, not to solve it, but to honour it. Let your breath fall softly now. Picture the stone beneath you, the channel at your side, the quiet shape of a life once lived, and gently, quietly placed in the dark. Not to vanish, but to be found when the silence was ready to speak again. Rome wears its history on its skin. Every piazza is layered with memory. Every ruin has a plaque, every temple a story. You can buy maps that trace the city from its mythic founding through every empire, invasion, and restoration. From Romulus to Mussolini, from Caesar to cellars turned museums. But you will not find this chamber. Not on the tourist guides, not in the walking tours, not even in most archaeological archives. It's as if it was never there, and yet it remains. Tucked beneath the Capitoline Hill, sealed behind reinforced doors, guarded by layers of bureaucracy and silence, is the room no one points to. Most visitors pass within meters of it, climbing steps, snapping photos, walking over the weight of something they will never be told. And those who know, they rarely speak. A few pages exist on private reports, unpublished notes, tucked in the back corners of academic libraries. But nothing official, no museum display, no name on the city's long list of sacred spaces. Why? Why would a city so proud of its past ignore a space so strange, so old, so unique? Perhaps because it doesn't fit, it doesn't celebrate, it doesn't explain, it doesn't behave. The chamber resists narrative, resists inclusion. It asks questions without offering triumph. And Rome prefers its ruins to be majestic, interpreted, conquered. But this space, this quiet room beneath a vanished temple, refuses conquest. It does not invite, it does not protest, it simply endures. A few guides have whispered of it, late at night, over wine when the tourists are gone. They say there's a place below the hill where lights fail too quickly, where echoes fold in strange ways, where cameras sometimes won't focus, but they laugh it off. Change the subject, point to the view instead. Only the custodians know its entrance now. Only a handful of researchers have seen it in the last 30 years, and of those, even fewer return. There are no photos on the city's websites, no signage, no brochures. The city has buried stranger things, catacombs, crypts, even entire forums. But this feels different. Not buried, excluded, as if someone all long ago or just yesterday decided the chamber belonged not to the city, but to something deeper, something slower, something that waits, because the chamber is not lost, it is not ruined, it is not forgotten, it is absent by design. And in that absence, a kind of patience grows, patient as stone, patient as breath held just a little too long, the kind of patience that does not need maps, because it has no destination, only memory, only presence, only the quiet awareness of being exactly where it has always been. So tonight, imagine the streets of Rome, lit with golden lamps, buzzing with footsteps and soft conversations. Imagine the museums closing, the steps cleared, the city winding down, and beneath it all, beneath your feet, a room waits, unmarked, unmapped, unmoved, not asking to be found, not begging to be known, only remaining. Because not all sacred places wear their names on stone. Some wear silence, and that silence is how they speak. It is not uncommon for archaeologists to step away from a dig. Health changes, funding dries up, life pulls in quieter directions. But the chamber beneath the Capitoline did not follow ordinary rhythms, and neither did those who studied it. Over the decades, a handful of scholars were granted access, carefully chosen, discreetly invited. No public call, no open grant, just quiet letters, private approvals. And again, those who entered that space left changed. Some abruptly stopped publishing, stopped attending conferences, stopped responding to letters. Others continued in name only, presenting elsewhere, shifting specialties, never once mentioning the chamber. One professor from northern Italy, after visiting the site in 1968, resigned within 6 months. He cited a misalignment of calling. He never worked in archaeology again. A Dutch linguist began an ambitious project to catalogue the symbols found in the chamber. Her notes, thorough, structured, stopped halfway through. The final page read only, "They are not waiting for translation." She moved to a small town near the sea, took up painting, refused interviews, and then there was the British researcher, Dr. Ellis Ray, a respected epigrapher known for deciphering complex proto-languages. He was invited into the chamber in the early 1970s. His journals are meticulous, at first, daily entries, sketches of the carvings, comparisons to Anatolian fragments, early Phoenician marks, even prehistoric cave signs. And then, a shift. The sketches stop aligning. The notes become abstract, words fragment, diagrams blur into circles. His final entry contains a single word, centered on the page: return. After that, he vanished from academia, resigned all positions, moved to a remote island off the Scottish coast. When a former colleague visited years later, he found Ray's study filled with spirals drawn in charcoal, on walls, on furniture, on mirrors. But no writing, no speech, just silence and circles. Another scholar, a young archaeologist from Florence, had a different experience. She lasted only one visit. After walking the chamber alone, she returned pale, trembling. She said she heard something. Not voices, not noise, breath. Not from herself, from the walls, like the chamber was exhaling, very slowly. She left the next day, took up botanical research, said she no longer trusted stone. There are also the dreams. At least 5 individuals reported intense dreams in the weeks after visiting the chamber. Each dream was different, but they shared a theme: being seen, not chased, not harmed, just watched, by something old, patient, unblinking. One wrote, "It wasn't trying to scare me. It just didn't need to look away." Why did they leave? What did they feel? None claimed revelation. None returned to solve the mystery. And maybe that's the point. The chamber does not demand understanding. It does not open itself to conquest. It simply is. And those who entered, who stood still long enough, felt something that could not be put into words. Not because it was too vast, but because it was too quiet. Like trying to carry silence back into noise. Some truths are not meant to be shared, only witnessed. And some witnesses choose to walk away rather than speak falsely. Tonight, imagine standing there, not to record, not to explain, just to notice. And then to choose: do you stay? Do you write? Do you forget? Do you return? There is no right answer, only the awareness that some knowledge does not belong to us. Not yet, and perhaps never. In Rome, walls speak, But the ones that speak the least are often the ones that know the most. When questions about the chamber beneath the Capitoline Hill began circulating in the early 1970s, they reached the ears of many: academics, historians, archivists, and eventually the Vatican. On paper, the Church had no reason to be involved. The chamber predated Christianity. There were no crosses, no saints, no inscriptions to sanctify. It wasn't a crypt, not a catacomb, not even a known place of worship. And yet, in 1972, a request came. Not public, not broadcast, just a quietly worded letter from the Vatican's Pontifical Commission for Sacred Archaeology to the Municipal Archaeological Office. The letter asked for three things: access to the chamber for Vatican-appointed scholars, temporary possession of 6 carved fragments from the inner eastern wall, a sealed box recovered near the drainage channel, containing charred organic matter and what appeared to be a stone amulet. The items were released without fanfare, on condition of return. That return never came. When followed up, the Vatican simply said, "These materials are under study. They are not our concern in the public record." And from that point on, every question met the same answer. It does not concern us, but it did, because the 6 fragments were not random. Each bore a section of the same spiral carving sequence that had defied translation. Each was part of a larger pattern, one that seemed to pulse inward toward the warmth-bearing wall. And the box, its contents were never documented officially. But the excavation log noted a smell of scorched cedar, a faint residue of crushed bone, and a perfectly round stone, etched with the same 3 interlocking circles found near the far wall. The same symbol found once before, in Anatolia, and nowhere else. Why would the Vatican take interest? Why those specific objects? Speculation bloomed quietly. Some believed the Church had seen the pattern before, in texts too old or obscure to be taught, in symbols tucked inside banned volumes, in dreams whispered from remote monasteries. Others thought it was an act of precaution. Remove what cannot be controlled, absorb what might echo too loudly. After all, the Church knew the weight of symbols. It had inherited millennia of myth, reshaped it, redirected it. But some symbols, the ones too raw, too unclaimed, resisted shaping. And those were often removed. It wasn't the first time. In the 15th century, reports surfaced of frescoes in southern Italy bearing marks identical to the ones in the chamber. Within a year, the church housing them burned to the ground. Accident, perhaps, or something more careful. Rome thrives on layers, but the church often polices what rises through them. One Jesuit scholar, under condition of anonymity, once said, "There are truths the church respects enough to leave untouched, and others it respects enough to bury." Could the chamber have held something too old to fit beneath the cross? A presence too quiet to confess, but too persistent to ignore? Or perhaps the Vatican recognized something older than belief, a kind of remnant awe left behind by a people who had no name for God, but still knew where to bow. There is no scandal here, no accusation, just a silence that deepens as the questions are asked. Where are the artifacts? Why were they taken? What was found inside the box? The answers do not come, not in statements, not in records, only in gestures. The way the Vatican scholars never returned. The way references to the chamber were quietly removed from city-sponsored dig summaries in the 1980s. The way the municipal archive box containing the original excavation request now sits empty, its paper trail vanished. And yet the chamber remains. It has not been closed, nor sealed, but it is rarely entered, rarely discussed. The door is not locked, just watched. And so we wonder, with soft breath and slow thought, what does the church fear? Not demons, not heresy, but ambiguity. A God that does not speak, a symbol that does not yield, a chamber that does not worship, only watches. Tonight, rest inside that mystery. Let it cradle you. Let it be unsolved. Some faiths ask you to kneel, others ask you to remember, and a few, The oldest ones ask nothing at all. They only wait for silence to become its own kind of answer. By 2004, technology had caught up with mystery, or so they thought. New imaging tools, high-resolution thermal scanners, airflow sensors capable of measuring even the smallest currents. The chamber beneath the Capitoline had not been visited in nearly a decade. It had been deemed archaeologically exhausted, its secrets measured, catalogued, archived. But a new team, quiet, government-funded, curious, was granted limited access. 3 researchers, 2 assistants, a fixed camera setup, and 1 long night of study. They entered just before midnight, hoping to avoid interference from the daily hum of the city above. The chamber greeted them as it always had, still, cold, quiet. Readings confirmed what had long been assumed. No measurable airflow. The air was dead, trapped, unmoving. But then, something moved. It began near the far wall, the one bearing the seal of the 3 circles, where the stone curved gently and the warmth had once been recorded. One assistant noticed it first. Dust, fine and undisturbed for centuries, lifted gently from the floor. Not in a draft, not in a rush, but in a slow, deliberate curl. The particles did not fall. They rose, and not upward, but inward, toward the wall itself. A spiral, mirroring the carvings, moving against gravity, against explanation. It lasted only 6 seconds. The team froze, then scrambled to check the sensors. No heat spike, no change in barometric pressure, no magnetic disruption. The footage was captured, marked for review. But that review never came. In the weeks following, the lead researcher fell ill, a rare neurological condition that forced him into early retirement. The project was shelved, the recordings boxed, misfiled, forgotten. Until a student archivist, sorting old drives in 2019, found a label that simply read, Sub-CH Anomalous 0043. She watched the footage and she saw it. Dust, rising slowly, curling like smoke in water, drawn not by wind but by something else. She alerted her supervisor. Within days, the footage was locked away again. No public statement, no publication, only the quiet hum of renewed attention in places that prefer not to be noticed. Some say it was a thermal anomaly, others insist it was magnetism, a rare environmental fluctuation. But those who saw it in real time don't describe it in terms of science. They say it felt like breath, not from them, not from any living thing. From the wall, as if the chamber, long dormant, had exhaled, just once, not violently, not in warning, more like a test to see who was watching, and maybe who remembered. What could cause dust to rise in still air, spiral inward, then settle with no trace? What presence curls upward without form? One assistant, now retired, later wrote in a private essay, "I didn't feel afraid, but I felt changed. Like I had seen something that wasn't meant to be witnessed, only allowed." She never returned to the site. The footage, as of now, remains unseen by the public. But the whisper of it, that dust, that spiral, that soft defiance of gravity, has entered the chamber's long history of gentle impossibilities. It did not scream. It did not demand. It curled, gracefully, briefly, towards something we cannot name. And then it was gone. But like all true mysteries, it left behind a question that does not fade. What moved the dust, and why? Just once? Tonight, imagine standing in that room, breath held, stillness pressing in, then the gentlest motion, a dance of ash, a curl of air that should not be, not frightening, not loud, just real, and impossible. Let that question carry you into sleep, not to answer it, but to remember how rarely we are granted such a moment, not to know, but to witness. It appeared quietly, a grainy image posted to a forgotten blog, buried in a travel journal, beneath photos of cracked columns and espresso by the Pantheon. The caption read, "Odd room under Capitoline." Felt weird, snapped this by accident. The photo is slightly tilted, likely taken while the camera hung loosely from a strap. It shows the chamber, unmistakably, the curvature of the far wall, the carvings, faint in the dim light, a soft film of dust hovering, caught in flash, but it was what stood in the centre of the frame that changed everything. A figure, kneeling, back to the camera, head bowed. The posture is unmistakable, reverent, still. They are facing the wall, specifically the section marked by the 3 interlocking circles. Their shape is unclear, neither distinctly male nor female. The clothing is indistinct, blending into the chamber's shadows. No visible equipment, no movement, just stillness, and a sense reported by nearly everyone who's seen the image that the figure is not posing. They are listening. Here's the problem. The chamber was closed in 2017, officially sealed since 2011 for preservation. The door locked, access restricted, no visitors allowed. The photographer, an architecture student from Berlin, had visited Rome on a semester abroad. He claimed he'd been allowed into a maintenance corridor near the Capitoline Museums as part of a class tour. Wandering slightly, he came across a door that had been left ajar. He stepped in. No signage, no guards, no obvious restriction, just a small flight of stone steps leading down into dimness. He said he didn't stay long. The air felt heavy, he said. The silence unnerved him. He snapped 2 photos, didn't review them until days later. The first photo was what he remembered, an empty room, rough stone, dust. The second, taken perhaps 2 seconds later, showed the kneeling figure. He swore he was alone. No one passed him, no one followed, and no one was in the chamber when he entered. He tried to revisit the site later. The door was locked. Museum staff claimed no such passage existed. Security footage was not available. His photo vanished from the blog within a week. Archived versions remain, but the original file was never traced. Within the archaeological community, the image is a myth whispered in corners. Some say it's a hoax, a shadow mistaken for a shape, a trick of low light and longing. Others say the photo is real, but the figure was never there, that it appeared only in the moments between camera and file, a glitch, a bleed-through, a glimpse of what the chamber remembers. One psycholinguist described it as a reverberation of presence. A posture repeated so often in ritual, the room remembers it for us. There is another possibility, that the figure is not a ghost, not an echo, but someone now lost who entered quietly for reasons no one recorded. A lone pilgrim, a researcher who didn't check in, or someone drawn, like sleepwalkers are drawn, to places that whisper in dreams. Whoever they were, they left no trace, no footprints, no name, no message, only a shape. Kneeling, facing the wall, as if listening for a voice that hadn't spoken in thousands of years. Some say it is the most sacred image of the chamber ever captured. Not because it reveals, but because it protects the mystery. The figure does not turn, does not speak, does not clarify. They only kneel, and in doing so, they remind us that some places are not for discovery, but for presence. What did they hear? Why were they there? Were they alone? Or was the chamber not empty when they arrived? And more unsettling still, did the chamber make itself seen for them? Tonight, imagine holding that camera. You press the shutter once, an empty room, stone and quiet. You press again, and something is there, not frightening, not violent, just present, just waiting, just listening. You lower the camera, and the room is empty again. Let that image carry you to sleep, not with fear, but with the slow hush of wonder, because not every presence is meant to explain itself. Some simply kneel and let the stone speak first. There are places that survive time, not because they were built to last, but because time forgot how to erase them. The chamber beneath the temple of Jupiter was not preserved, it was endured, covered by conquest, silenced by stone, ignored perhaps intentionally by every era that came after, and yet it remained. What was carved into its walls was not art, not in the sense of beauty or expression. It was something older, more direct, a memory, burned into stone so it would not have to rely on words. A warning, not in the voice of panic, but of solemnity, of repetition, of fire passed hand to hand across generations, and an invitation, quiet as a held breath, for anyone willing to enter without question and stay without answers. Rome built over it, a temple for Jupiter, a republic, an empire, a capital of faith and government and modernity, but none of it could silence the hum beneath the hill, because the ground still remembers, the air still stills, the dust still curls, the stone in places is still warm, not from machines, not from sun, but from presence. There are chambers across the world where something lingers, a hush inside a tomb, a wait behind a shrine, a stillness that waits until everyone else has left. This place is one of them, and the thing that separates it from others is how it resists being known. It does not lend itself to maps. It does not yield to translation. It is not a riddle to be solved. It is a presence to be sat with, not to uncover, but to witness. Every attempt to define the chamber, to place it within Rome's long-ordered story, has softened with time. Because the deeper you go into history, the more the names blur. The more the lines between belief and architecture, ritual and warning, begin to fade. And what remains is something elemental, a shape, a symbol, a spiral in stone, and a silence that does not end when you walk away. What if this chamber was the memory of something Rome feared to remember, not because it was evil, but because it was older than control? What if the markings weren't meant to convey meaning so much as keep it alive, without the need for language? What if the entire room was built to hold something the earth refused to forget, and people tried, softly, to carry forward, without understanding it fully? That's what the chamber feels like, not a place where knowledge ends, but where it waits. Some truths aren't passed by logic. They're passed like a flame, from one quiet breath to the next. Not everyone sees it, not everyone feels it, but those who do never fully return to the world the same. There is something beneath the temple, not a god, not a secret, but something more persistent than either. A memory that doesn't need you to remember the whole story, just to not forget the feeling. And maybe that's what matters. Not what it means, but that it still hums, that it's still here, that in the noise of a city built on centuries, there is one place that remains unspoken and fully present. Tonight, let the hum guide you, not to understanding, but to stillness. Close your eyes, picture the stone, the spirals, the soft heat, the dust rising in a room where no wind moves. It is not asking to be solved, it is only asking to be remembered. Not with words, but with breath. Because the oldest truths don't come to us as answers. They come to us as rooms, rooms beneath rooms, still, waiting, unmoved, and beneath them the ground, still humming, still holding what time could not. You don't need to understand them, not tonight, not ever maybe. The carvings in the chamber were never meant for understanding. They were not arguments, not records, not declarations. They were presence, etched in stone, held in dust, waiting. Tonight, we drift toward that place, not to uncover, not to reveal, but simply to arrive. We begin above, on the Capitoline Hill, where footsteps echo between statues and old stone. The city murmurs behind us. Modern life, distant, humming, unaware. And beneath us, the chamber waits. You descend slowly. Stone steps smooth with time. The air thickens. The light softens. You feel yourself entering not just a space, but a silence. The walls don't greet you. They recognize you, because this place has no doors, only thresholds. And you have crossed one. You stand inside the chamber. It is cool, still. The carvings line the walls, spirals, strokes, symbols curved and broken, like half-remembered songs. They do not ask for your eyes, they ask for your attention. And when you let your breath slow, when your shoulders fall, when the noise in your mind begins to quiet, they begin to speak. Not in language, in knowing. You don't hear them, you feel them. Like the warmth of someone's hand you haven't seen in years. Like a lullaby your mother sang only once, but you remember the way it made you feel. Each mark holds something, a moment, a motion, a memory. You trace one with your hand, slowly. Not to decode, just to be with it. It hums faintly, not a sound, but an echo inside your ribs. You don't ask what it means. You only say, I see you. And in that moment, the chamber becomes something else. Not a mystery, not a puzzle, but a companion. A presence that has waited, not for explanation, but for someone to stop and simply be here. You look around. The dust is still. The warmth from the hearthstone lingers, faint. The seal of the 3 circles is etched into the far wall. You do not approach. You bow your head. Just a little. As if your body remembers something. Your mind does not. Perhaps that is all memory is, not recollection, but posture, breath, an instinct to listen when there is nothing left to hear. The carvings are not history. They are not answers. They are what remains when words run out. And you are here, not to fix, not to figure, but to witness, to be the quiet company that every forgotten thing deserves. You let your hand rest on the wall, stone beneath your fingers, dust in the air. You close your eyes and for a moment, a brief, feather-soft moment, you feel that you are remembering something. Not from your life, but from something deeper. A truth that was never spoken aloud because it didn't need to be. The kind of truth that doesn't live in words, only in presence. The chamber does not speak, it does not move, but it welcomes you, gently, quietly, as if to say, you found your way back. And maybe that's enough. Not revelation, not discovery, just return. Tonight, as you lie down, let your breath match the stillness of that room. Let the carvings keep you company. Let them hum softly in the back of your thoughts, not to be solved, but simply to be with you. Because some stories do not end. They remain, waiting, and some carvings aren't for reading. They are for remembering what silence sounds like when it loves you back.